Okay, so welcome back to the second week of Herbs for Health. We're here at the Concrete Gardens. We're going to look at some things that actually many of you might think of as weeds, and if you've done any gardening you might have tried to get rid of from your garden. So we're going to be looking at plantain, which unfortunately is not the banana type. It's these two plants which look quite different from this perspective. So we've got broadleaf plantain, which you can tell the name, it's got a broad leaf, and it also has a short stalk and lots of seeds. And longleaf plantain, which has a long leaf and a long stalk and a smaller amount of seeds. We're also going to be looking at the seeds of a plant that lots of people recognise, and don't worry, I'm immune from getting stung. This is nettle, and these little tassely bits here are actually the flower and seed heads. So we're going to look at how we use those. And then we're also going to be looking at another weedy favourite, which is dandelion. And I don't know, this one's wilted a bit, even though I only picked it a little bit about 5 minutes ago, and how we use dandelion leaf. And we're going to be looking largely at the food uses of these, but I'll also talk to you a little bit about medicinal uses. So the two plants that we're looking at here are the two different forms of plantain. So here we have long-leaved plantain, so you can see these long leaves, and here we have broadleaf plantain, the broad leaves. You can tell them that they're both related because they have these veins on the back of the leaves in both of them that run parallel. So rather than with most kind of what you would think of as a regular leaf, where you've got like a line up the middle and little bits coming off the sides, these run parallel, or as some people would call it, in stripes. The other significant difference is the long-leafed one, like I said, has this long stem and a small seed head, and the broadleaf one has a shorter stem but more seeds. The broadleaf one does tend to grow in slightly muckier places than the long-leaved one, so I tend to harvest the long-leaf one more often, but for some reason here they both seem quite happy in the same place. When we're talking about these seeds, we also need to look out for the flowers. So these funny little white fluffy bits, those are the actual flowers of the plantain, and they turn into the seeds. So at this stage, this plant is in flower, but it doesn't have very many seeds on it. And this one has gone past flowering and it's got lots of seeds. And these are quite fresh at the minute. And as a kind of random top tip, the fresh seeds are very popular with budgies and other pet birds, because I guess most of the seeds and things that they get are dried, so they're getting more essential fatty acids and things like that out of these seeds, and we can get those too. You can harvest these seeds, you basically just gently pinch off, so at the growing point, so you're not damaging the plant, and then you just take the seeds off like this and just sort of take those off like that. So you can see, so that's what the seeds look like, the kind of green seeds. And these are full of B vitamins. They're really tasty as they are. You can toast them, but that does reduce the vitamin content a little bit, because the heat denatures some of the vitamins. But the vitamins in those are really, really useful, and it's a really nice little snack to have as you go along the way. There is a bit of a mushroomy flavour to them, and we're going to use that to make a no mushroom soup later on. From a medicinal point of view, we tend to use the leaves of the broadleaf and the longleaf plantain, Plantago lanceolata and Plantago major, and they're used particularly for kind of respiratory and urinary conditions, especially if you're trying to kind of repair mucous membranes. So if you think about if you have like a really sniffly cold and you're kind of like, you're bunged up and dry, but you're kind of like mucousy as well, plantain works really well in that it like dries the mucus without over drying the membranes, so it kind of restores the membranes to their good position. It's called Plantago after, well, this is the thing, either after the Plantagenet kings of England or the kings were named after the plant. I have yet to fully work out which way around it was, but it's because it's one of the great wound healers. So as well as respiratory and urinary conditions, it's really good. Like the yarrow that we looked at in week 1, you can do the same again, is take a little bit of your broadleaf plantain, chew it yourself for your own cuts, pop it on, and then wrap the leaf round to hold that in place like a bandage. So they're absolutely fantastic. One of the other plants we're looking at today, and we're going to go and look at some older versions of it somewhere else in the garden, but I've actually just noticed that we have some new nettle here. So I'm going to pick this, but I don't recommend it for everyone. I just don't get stung. So I'm going to pick that, at growing point, so squish the nettle bits. So we could use this to make nettle soup. We wouldn't use old nettle to make nettle soup, and you don't usually make nettle soup any time other than the spring. But occasionally, if the weather conditions are right, you get new growths of nettles, sometimes called a second spring. Now, I would usually expect that in August or September, but the weather's been a bit weird this year, so I think that's possibly got to do with that as much as anything else. But these can be used as like a fresh nettle tea, so if you have allergies, hay fever in particular, nettle's fantastic for that. It's got lots of really good antihistamine qualities to it. But yeah, only picking the really, really new stuff if you find it. So another of the wild leaves that we're going to look at is dandelion. I probably wouldn't pick them from here because obviously it's a path that people walk on, but it gives you a good indication of what the dandelion looks like. So dandelion has these very serrated leaves, and a way of remembering that is that we name it in English after the French, which is dandelion, which means lion's teeth. And then the French name it pissenlit after the British name for it, wet the bed. It's all quite confusing, but interesting linguistics. So dandelion leaves are fantastic as food. They're really tasty. They're very good for you because they're slightly bitter, because in general our diets don't have a lot of bitter foods in them. I'm going to be making some stuff with them later on. Dandelion leaves are also slightly diuretic, so hence the name wet the bed, but they are actually very good for children who wet the bed, because if you give them dandelion leaf tea during the day, that means they tend to go during the day and then not go at night. They're also very, very nutritious. They've got a lot of vitamins and minerals in them, so they're a nice thing to try and put into your diet if you can find some in a little path that hasn't been walked on. So, looking at the leaves and seeds that we can gather from the wild, one of the simplest things that you can do is just eat the things raw. So you can eat dandelion leaf raw. You can also eat your plantain seeds, so the broadleaf one here, which has got more juicy seeds on it. And you can also eat the nettle seeds raw. Again, not advised to pick it up the way I'm doing it, I just don't get stung. The seeds themselves aren't very stingy, so you can just eat them straight away. Most people find that they don't get a sting off that. Obviously, if you're super, super reactive to nettle, possibly leave it. But most people find that quite good. So the nettle seed, I've told you a bit about the vitamins that you can get from the plantain seed. The nettle seed is actually really good for stamina. So it helps your body to get more energy and kind of keep going. And what I often do is I dry the nettle seed. So I've got some dried nettle seeds here. And these can make a really nice sort of like seasoning based on the Japanese seasoning gamasio, which I don't know what that means, but it is a seasoning made using sesame seeds and salt, and I add some nettle seed to it, and you can sprinkle that on your salads and just to add a little bit of extra flavouring and to reduce the amount of salt that you're using, because you use about the same amount as gamasio as you would use salt, and you get different types of salts in the nettle seed. So I'm going to show you how I do that. It's really easy. It's like very basic cooking option. You just need to toast some sesame seeds. So I'm just going to work out how to fire up. So that's that going. So just pop the pan on, and I'm going to use about twice as much sesame seed as nettle seed. So have a wee bit of a sugar of that, is the technical term. So that's just, you want to just kind of keep your nose out for the sesame seeds. You want to be shaking them quite a bit. You just want them to lightly toast. You don't want them to get too burnt. And then I'm going to add to them, like I say, about half as much of my dried nettle seed. So this seasoning will keep for longer because I'm using dried nettle seed. You can, if you're going to use it all in the next week or so, use the fresh stuff. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of salt just to round it out, nowhere near all of that. So just listening into the sesame and smelling into the sesame. So starting to smell a wee bit of a toast there. And sometimes they'll start to pop, and that's a good sign that you're getting a good bit of heat into them. So just keeping that going. So I would use this as a topping for salads, or we're going to be making a soup as well. So you could kind of stir it into a soup towards the end, just to give it a little bit of a crackle and a little bit of extra seasoning. And I've lost some of the sesame seeds there. Okay. Oh, just starting to brown slightly. That's just keeping going on there. So if you are going to use the nettle seed fresh, you just take it gently off the stem, and then you can just thread them off like you would with the leaves on other plants. And you end up with these little seed heads, which are genuinely very, very tasty. And you want it, if you're eating them, crunch them towards the front of your mouth. It gives you much more of a sense of the flavour. Right, so those are just browning up nicely. So I'm gonna take a bowl. That's about the right brownness for me. So I'm just going to pop these into a bowl. Just get the last bits out because I'm going to be using this pan to make something else. And then in the bowl, so I'm going to add some nettle seeds. You see those going in? The wind's taking some of them away, so that's a good few pinches of nettle seed. And those will warm up a little bit with the... So I could take a little bit more nettle seed. So these are ones that I dried. They don't take very long to dry, just a few days, and it will make it last for a bit longer. And then just a little bit of salt. I'm going to squish through that, so a couple of pinches of salt. And then you can mix that up, and that'll keep in a jar for a good couple of months, and you can use that to season things. And one of the things that you could use to season is some dandelion leaves, which I'm going to cook up with some garlic. So, very simple. Just going to, oh, there goes the dandelion leaf. Going to use a knife for the garlic. Now with garlic, ideally, what you want to do is cut it a good 10-15 minutes before you use it, and that allows it to break down a little bit into more of its medicinal components. Ooh, bad bit in that one. So imagine I did that. So what I'm going to do is, I've got a little bit of oil, and I'm going to add the garlic to the oil whilst I'm chopping up the dandelion. So that'll let it infuse a little bit. Okay, just put that straight in, and that'll start to infuse into the oil and start to give off some of its medicinal properties. So with garlic, if you imagine a raw clove of garlic, it doesn't actually really smell of anything until you cut it, and that's because the smelly bits of it happen when you break the cell wall, and enzymes get onto the kind of non-smelly bits of garlic and turn them into the smelly bits, which are actually the medicinal bits. So I'm just going to warm that gently. Got to be most people know, kind of be careful with garlic because you don't want to burn it, because that means it starts to get very bitter. So you just want to gently heat that. And then I'm going to be lazy and find a pair of scissors wherever I've put them. I have some scissors. And it's just a nice easy way to just chop your dandelion greens in. And you really these don't need to be in heat for any length of time at all. I'm just doing a little bit just now, but these will cook down. So there's probably like almost enough heat in the pan already. So just keeping that moving with the garlic. Now that I've put quite a lot of garlic in for this size of a portion, but you can do it to however much works for you. And there it is, it's all kind of broken down quite nicely, so that makes a nice little sort of side dish. That was about 12 dandelion leaves, so you can get quite a lot of dandelion leaves into your diet. And what I would do is pop that onto a plate and top it off with some of the nettle seed gamasio, and that will make a really nice kind of wild side order for and it's, as you can see, it takes minutes to do, especially if you have scissors. The other thing that I'm going to show you how to do is a little bit more complicated, and that involves, we're back to our plantain seeds. So remember, this is the longleaf plantain with the long leaf, with the long stem, and these are kind of flowering at the moment. So remember, these are the little flowers here, the little white bits. And what I'm going to do is make a no mushroom soup, which is a recipe that I've stolen from the foraging zine for July, Eat Wild. So these have a mushroomy taste. So the idea is that we pop these into a soup stock and it gives us mushroom soup without the mushrooms. So, very simple. I'm just going to have, we've got some boiling water, we've got our pan with all of the plantain seeds in it. What I'm just going to do is, again with my scissors, just give these a bit of a chop. Now we're not actually going to be eating these, we're just after them for the flavour. So we're going to sieve these out in the end before we put our little bowl of soup together, which we can have with our nice dandelion greens. So just chopping these again, this is just like super easy. So I've got maybe 15 to 20 plantain heads in here that I picked this morning. And you can see quite a lot of them have still got the flowers on them, but the seeds also have a mushroomy taste. And I didn't really believe that at first, but they really do. There's a genuinely kind of mushroomy flavouring to them. And it might be good if you've got somebody who doesn't like the texture of mushrooms. A lot of people aren't into mushrooms because of the texture, or just you want to have a sort of interesting soup but you don't have any mushrooms around. You'll probably find plantain, now that you know what it looks like, at this time of year you'll likely find it everywhere. So I'm going to put, this might take a little while, put boiling water in this, and we're just going to let these cook a little bit with some stock. So I would say for that's maybe like 2 decent portions. So I'm going to use half a stock cube with this. And it's going to be extra, this is actually a garlicky stock cube anyway, but it's going to be extra garlicky because I'm using my garlic knife. And then just need to pop this on, which for some reason I seem to need to do with both hands. There we go. So we're just wanting that to, an extra garlic from my spatula. So we're just wanting to bring that back to the boil really. And in fact, I mean, we're kind of making a plantain seed head tea really, but because it's going to have that mushroomy flavour, we'll think of it as a soup. But actually, effectively what we're doing here is just making a strong plantain seed head tea. And you could add other things in with this as well. That new nettle that we saw, like a little bit of nettle in, you could have a mushroom and nettle soup with that. You probably want to blend that if you're doing that, because then it gives it an amazing nettle-y colour. But if you can see, we're just starting to get the colour coming out of that there. I don't know if that's coming up. And that's just getting deeper and deeper. I think I've put a bit of rogue dandelion leaf in it as well, but that's all good. So we're just going to leave that to boil away. Other things that you can do with plantain seed heads is you can dry them and use them for later use, but I think using them fresh is one of the nicest ways to have them. And this is just coming up to the boil. Just get in there. And I'm going to pop and get my sieve. And the bowls. So that's just come into the boil there. So I'm going to put so we're going to have our greens with a hefty pinch of gamasio, and that's still nice and warm, so that's really, that's a nice tasty one. I'm going to put all the rest of my gamasio into here, and just so you can see the colour of it, we're going to sieve the soup into that little bowl there. So this is just coming to the boil. And if you want, what you could do is warm this up and just leave it on a gentle heat for a while, and that'll get even more of the mushroomy flavour out. So you can leave it for as long as you want. Starting with boiling water is kind of helpful because that does begin that process really quickly. But if you're doing it from cold water, just heat it gently. And that's just off the boil there. So I think I'm happy with that. There's plenty of steam rising up. I'm going to turn that off, and then I'm just going to, so that you can see the nice colour there. And you're still getting a few bits of mushroominess there. So some of the plantain heads still there. So that makes a really lovely soup. And we've got the soup and our greens on the side. So you can make yourself a little wild food lunch. Okay.